A lot of folks forget that most of us used to be them. It's really important for us to remember our history. Unless you're one of the first Americans, a Native American, you came from someplace else. Somebody brought you. Somebody brought you.
For the earliest immigrants, the decision to immigrate was not easy. They would be leaving home for an uncertain future, and many people died on their journey or from dangers or diseases in the new land. Besides this, it was by no means certain that they would ever see friends or family again. It was a life-altering decision. Economic problems and unemployment were by far the greatest reasons why most Scandinavians relocated to America with the hope of starting a new and improved life. Crossing the Atlantic on the sail took 4 to 8 weeks, and the tickets were very expensive. At that time, a ticket across the Atlantic would cost over a year's salary for a typical Danish farmer.
We are going to talk about the Scandinavian immigration history to the United States. And the first country we are going to talk about is Sweden. Sweden were the first country from Scandinavia to come to the United States. They started to immigrate in the early 70s.
The first Swedish immigrants settled in New Jersey, Philadelphia, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. In 1643, a group of 50 Finnish and Swedish colonists established the first small colony in Delaware Bay, which they called New Sweden. Swedish immigration to America was slow in the 1700s since Sweden had lost its foothold in the New World. Therefore, the political, religious, and economic conditions in Sweden were stable in the 1700s compared to many other European countries, and only a few Swedish people were motivated enough to take the long and dangerous journey all the way to America.
Nationallax was a symbol of Scandinavian Swedish immigrants because they started to live in the lax. In 1830 and 40, small groups of farmers traveled to the United States to search for more land and religious freedom.
Later on in the 1870s, the majority of Swedes settled in Idaho and Minnesota. These states combined with New York and California are still where the majority of Swedes are to be found. In the 1900s, there were 150,000 first or second generation Swedes living in Chicago. This was a larger figure than any other city besides Stockholm. The Swedes returned to the US in the 19th century. They came as a part of a mass immigration. In 1930, the Swedes had reached more than 1.5 million. That also included the second generation of Swedish Americans. The immigration from Norway to the United States started at the beginning of the 18th century because of the industrial slowdown. Therefore, the Norwegians had to seek elsewhere in order to provide safety and financial security for their families. Later on in the 1880s, it was not only families who immigrated to America, but the immigrants became much younger with a good education and good backgrounds. They started to move without their families because America were in need of labor since the American economy was growing. They settled mainly in smaller towns, living in farmer communities, mainly in Seattle, Brooklyn, New York, Alaska, Texas, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Today, these states are still where the most Norwegians are to be found. In the summertime of 1825, a group of 6 different families traveled together on a long journey that lasted more than 14 weeks from Stavanger and all the way to New York's harbor. The reason they did that was because they wanted to avoid the religious chaos that was causing a lot of trouble at that time in Norway. These families traveled in a small sloop over the Atlantic Ocean in order to provide the best possible future and safety for their individual families. After the dangerous journey, the local press in New York marveled at the bravery of these Norwegian pilgrims, which made them a sensation in the history of immigration in America.
In the mid-1800s, the Danish population increased rapidly. This meant there were not enough jobs and unemployment increased. The Danish family were awfully large, and only one child could take over the family farm. So more children growing up in rural areas had little hope of owning a farm. As a result, most Danish immigrants in the 19th century were young, single-family sons between the age of 15 and 29. They left to escape from slipping into the landless class, and with the hope that they could acquire a farm, marry, and start a family in a land of economic opportunities. This resulted in 1 out of every 9 Dane immigrating to America, and now 5% of total population in the United States reporting having Danish ancestry.
Danes assimilated quickly because of the fact that they were white, European, and Protestants. Since the majority of the Danish immigrants were farmers, they settled in the Midwest in large numbers, drawn there because the prairies and the plains had great agricultural potential, and the governments and railroads offered a large amount of land for sale. Today, the majority of Americans with Danish ancestry lives in California. Once settled, the Danish farmers generally raised cattle, hogs, and some sheep. Some settlers were able to make a decent living, but a large amount of Danes ended up even more poor than they were before. Between 1886 and 1934, the Danish immigrants created 7 Danish colonies trying to preserve the Danish culture. They created Tyler and Askov in Minnesota, Denne and Nysted in Nebraska, Danevang in Texas, Dagmar in Montana, and Solvang in California. Solvang was created in 1911 by a group of Danish teachers. In 2010, there were 5,245 residents in Solvang. Solvang is an example of how Danish culture still is visible in America. Therefore, we talked to my friend Frederik, who lived in Solvang for half a year as part of his education at Niels Brock, about how Solvang is today.
Solvang is kind of centered around Danish cultural values. They have what they think is Danish architecture, which it really isn't. Danish name shops. They have bakers, chocolate shops as well. So, and they sell stuff like remoulade, råbrød, and flødeboller. Most Danish-related people in Solvang don't really speak Danish or embrace the Danish culture. They don't really eat Danish food. They might have tried it like once or twice, but they think medisterpølse is Danish, so they eat that sometimes. Well, people speak Danish in Denmark. In Solvang, they try to embrace Danish culture, but it's really just as much Norway or Sweden or Dutch as it is Danish, to be honest. Scandinavian, maybe. Well, Solvang is kind of kitsch. Mostly old people live there actually, so it's actually quite pretty. It's very quiet. Criminality is low. Kind of the perfect spot for old people to settle down. It's a cute town. There is something called Danish Days, which is kind of a festival of some sort where they celebrate Denmark in California. They had æbleskewer. That was nice. We got to walk around on the streets of Solvang, which is literally like a 10-minute walk. That was a fun event. It's just a small city. People drive by. People think it's cute, so they visit it. They get something to eat, maybe. So
I would have been like that on your ass.